Hello, good beings, and welcome back to Midnight Requiem. Today we'll be talking about Frida Kahlo. Before Frida became a 21st century icon for her distinct unibrow and mustache, she had always stood out. That may be why she became her own favorite model in her art. Frida's tragic life, born amid political chaos, reflects a profound narrative of resilience and artistic innovation. She incorporated her life's chronic pain in her art and portrayed it in surreal and magical way, with rare and unseen pictures. This is Frida behind the brush. At the age of 18, Frida's life took an unexpected turn from her dream of becoming a doctor. The bus she and her friend Alejandro Gomez Arias were on crashed into a streetcar, an accident she described as a strange crash, not violent, but dull and slow, that profoundly altered her trajectory. The crash claimed the lives of many students that day and left Frida with a serious and permanent injuries. Frida's midsection was penetrated by a long metal rod from the car. On the scene of the accident, an onlooker tried to remove the metal rod from Frida's body. When he pulled it, Arias called Frida screamed so loud that no one heard the siren of the Red Cross ambulance. Encased in a full-body plastered cast, Frida's carefree childhood came to an abrupt end. There was a light at the end of Frida's tunnel. Her time in the hospital bed ignited her artistic journey. She started with medical illustrations on an easel, molded and tweaked to fit over her hospital bed. According to Vanessa Severo, creator of the play Frida, a self-portrait, Kahlo's honesty about her struggles became a defining aspect of her art. Despite the challenges, Frida was committed to conveying her story through her compelling paintings. In a letter, she wrote Arias that she now lived on a painful planet, transparent as ice. Being bedridden wasn't new for Frida. She contracted polio at the age of 6 and had to live in her hospital bed for 9 months. The disease caused her right leg and foot to grow much thinner than her left, causing her to limp throughout her recovery. She wore long skirts to cover that for the rest of her life. Her father encouraged her to do lots of sports to help her recover. She played soccer, went swimming, and even wrestled, which was very unusual at the time for a girl. That point in life created for a very close bond with her father for the rest of her life. With all the difficulties Frida faced as a child, her close relationship with her father was one of the few good things in her life. He stood by her lovingly and supported her through and through. By the time she was able to become a little more active again, her father even encouraged her to help him with his photography work, despite it being viewed as a job for only men. He didn't care what people thought and even motivated her to do some sports. Frida's father had the amazing ability to empathize with his little girl, know what she was feeling and going through, and therefore take her under his protective and supporting wing. Out of all the bad things she experienced, he was one rock she could count on for support. The Love Saga of Frida and Diego Rivera, both iconic 20th century artists, unfolded with both public and private drama. Their relationship was passionate and often tumultuous. Diego was 20 years Kahlo's senior and a fellow artist she met at one of Modi's parties in June 1928. They got married the following year when Frida was 22 years old, despite both their mothers being appalled by the idea. They referred to it as the marriage between an elephant and a dove. Looking at their photos, they weren't wrong. Frida's father approved as Rivera was rich and powerful and able to support his daughter. Even after her death, she was only known as Rivera's wife. After she died in 1954, exactly 1 week after her 47th birthday, she was still only known as Rivera's wife. As the 1970s approached, her work was rediscovered by art historians, and political activists. Frida was always in Rivera's shadow, hence why she was only known as Rivera's wife. Even until after her death, articles were written about them in newspaper, simply referred to them as Diego and Frida. After the rediscovery of Frida's work, she quickly started overshadowing her husband as people started viewing her as an icon in political activism. But more importantly, by 1990, she became an icon for feminists and the LGBTQ movements. In her short life of only 47 years on Earth, she never had any children to carry on some form of legacy. She was, however, pregnant twice, but opted for abortion as she didn't want children. In a crazy turn of events, her second abortion wasn't successful, and she managed to still be pregnant after taking the medication designed to terminate the pregnancy. After some thought and consideration, she decided to keep the child, but fate had other plans and she suffered a miscarriage soon after. This event was just another tragic event of a long line of many to yet come. When looking at Frida's earlier work, you may notice her pieces were inspired by artists from the Renaissance era, like Botticelli and avant-garde movements, specifically surrounding the artistic movements of Cubism. She would use everyone around her as her subject matter, from her sister, her friends from school, and then of course, as she is most famously known for, the portraits of herself. Frida went through more than most people would ever be able to bear. Her positive attitude forced her to keep going and find new light in being bedridden after her accident. The art that came from it was seen as a blessing, and she created a deep level of questioning things like identity and our very existence. Her paintings represented the way she saw the world at every stage of her life. According to Mexican mythology, at the time of her art pieces, it was believed that monkeys were a symbol of lust. However, not the case with Frida's pieces. To her, they symbolized protection, and she often used them in her art pieces. It could also be due to the fact that she kept monkeys as pets at one stage in her life. She didn't just have monkeys as pets though. She was also a serious collector of some pretty exotic pets. She owned a variety of parrots, eagles, and ancient Aztec dogs. She had a big love for animals, but it was mainly the challenge of having such an exotic array that inspired her. They meant to her different things than they meant to society, and she proved this to the world through the unique use of them in every art piece. In 2007, a series of letters exchanged between Frida and her doctor and a confidant revealed she had a miscarriage in 1932. In these letters, she expresses her devastation upon realizing that she could never have child with Rivera. The letters, spanning from 1932 to 1951, had been hidden for half a century following her death. In every letter, Frida began with the endearing phrase, "My beloved doctor." After her tram accident, she had already undergone one abortion due to her injuries, and when she became pregnant again a few years later, she tragically suffered a miscarriage. One letter from 1931 shows her frustration. "I'm not painting or doing anything. I dislike the high society here," referring to New York where she traveled with Rivera, "and feel little rage against all these fat cats since I've seen thousands of people in terrible misery." While on her trip to America with her husband, Frida's mother passed away in Mexico only 3 months after her miscarriage. Frida grew to hate America because her husband enjoyed his fame there and forced her to stay there. Unable to return to Mexico, her homeland and her source of inspiration, Frida then painted to protest the superficiality of capitalism and the decay of important human values while in the U.S., which contributed some of her most powerful work. Frida admitted to being born at their home known as La Casa Azul, or the Blue House, but officially documented studies indicate otherwise. It appears she was born close to her grandmother's home, and not her own home, which she stated according to sources. 30 surgeries in total, with one being the amputation of her foot. When you count all of these surgeries Frida encountered in her life, it came to a total of 30. That is more than most people experience in their whole lifetime. In today's world, with all the new and advanced technologies, they certainly did not have back then. Out of all the surgeries she endured, the amputation of her foot after contracting gangrene was by far the most severe. The pain came through in her art, and it brought about a sense of sadness when you looked at her pieces. With all the pain she endured and all the art she was able to make to find healing and channel what she was going through to let it go, she, like so many other artists throughout history, only became famous for her work after her death. Her father had plans for her. Due to her constant battle with her health, she was forced to go to school much later than the kids her age. She started at the same time as her younger sister and was homeschooled through grades 5 and 6, while her other sisters were all attending convent schools. This was due to Frida's father's plans for her, which were different from the plans he had for her other siblings. Her father was of German descent and decided that Frida should attend a German school in honor of that heritage. Frida, on the other hand, was a rebel by nature and was expelled from the school sooner than being enrolled. Unfortunately, the next school was even more of a nightmare. It wasn't even her fault. A teacher severely abused the young Frida at the new school from vocational teachers. The plans before the accident, Frida's dream was to become a doctor due to having been so sick throughout her childhood. It inspired her to study medicine in a way that she could help others who go through the same thing. Only 35 girls attended a school of 2,000 students where Frida excelled tremendously in order to get to the top. The hard work paid off, and Frida was accepted into the National Preparatory School of Natural Sciences. Unfortunately, the terrible bus accident ripped those dreams away from her when she was unable to further her studies. It was a very tragic sequence of events that she experienced throughout her life. And as much as art saved her in the end, we can't help but feel a deep sorrow imagining the mental, emotional, and physical turmoil she went through. School, political activism, and Indigenismo. Frida and 9 of her classmates were involved in a tiny movement called Cachuchas. The group became a subject for some of her early paintings, and it was around this time Frida became aware and involved of politics. She grew very interested in political activism and social justice concerning the culture in and around Mexico, her place of birth, and the country she felt the most love for. The school she attended was particularly proud of its Mexican culture and opposed the idea that Europe was better than Mexico. They even gave it a word. They called it indigenismo. It meant that their indigenous heritage rejected invading beliefs that Mexico wasn't as good as European systems and their westernized ways. Frida lied about being 3 years younger than she was even long after she left school. She wanted to be what she called a daughter of the revolution, so it was only fitting that she claimed to have been born in 1910, just as it started. It doesn't really matter what her age was, as she was well beyond her years when it came to her art. She grew to be mentally and emotionally much stronger than the man she went on to marry. She publicly claimed to be a better artist than him, saying, "Of course, he does well for a little boy, but it is I who am the big artist." Frida had a very big personality, which compensated for her frail body. The dark side of the man she married, Diego Rivera. It is no secret the man was not nice to her. The only difference compared to other relationships where the man is a womanizer was that Frida was capable of playing the same game. She had just as many affairs behind Rivera's back as he did behind hers. One of her affairs lasted for many years until the photographer named Nicholas Moray eventually married someone else. Rivera's affairs did, however, have an impact on her heart, but she managed to deal with it in the two can play that game fashion. Rivera had money, and he was able to pay for all of Frida's hospital bills and pretty much anything and everything else. He loved that Frida was a strong woman, as he didn't settle for an old school warped misperceptions about masculinity where men had to dominate women. They had affairs with other people throughout almost their whole marriage. Most men would hide the fact that they are womanizers until after the wedding. If you look at issues concerning equal rights, feminism topics like that are very in and out faces through social media and these easily accessible platforms. Well, not in the case of Diego Rivera, who was a self-confessed openly aggressive womanizer. Frida and Rivera's marriage was abusive at times and they had their fair share of troubles to deal with. They both pretty much had affairs with other people throughout their entire marriage. Frida was definitely strong enough to deal with Rivera's affairs and even become more powerful than him as an artist. Though it didn't happen in the beginning or even while she was even alive, her fame succeeded Rivera's by far. A bitter pill to swallow, she was very unhappy in America. After having to go to America to join her husband on his trip, she became miserable, while Rivera was dealing with capitalists and rich people who felt important to care about the poor. Frida couldn't handle seeing the economical divide and the major difference in class. She couldn't understand why the rich people were able to attend overpriced parties while arriving overdressed with inexpensive jewelry and clothes. The people Rivera were socializing with wore in one night more expensive items than most of the poor ever saw in their lifetime. She could not be around her husband's friends and colleagues while poor people had nothing and slept outside on the streets. It was the bitter divided that she didn't want to witness anymore. Returning to Mexico, leaving Rivera and Frida's first solo exhibition, they eventually returned back to Mexico, but the things were about to get worse between them. Following one particular gruesome affair that Rivera had, Frida decided to move out and spend time by herself, living separately from Rivera. She then started pursuing an affair with a very famous American artist, Ismu Noguchi. After Noguchi, she jumped to the next lover, another well-known artist by the name of Andre Breton. He was a surrealist who coordinated Frida's first ever solo art show in New York in 1938. They received such positive response from the exhibition that they even had another one in France, but unfortunately, this one didn't go down so well. You win some, you lose some, and the confidence these exhibitions gave Frida was exactly what she needed to continue believing in the power of her art. First ever Mexican artist to be exhibited in Louvre, her solo art exhibition in France didn't receive quite the positive feedback they were hoping for, especially after the success of the one in New York. Yet Frida sold one of her pieces, which later became one of her most worthy paintings, titled The Frame. She was the first ever Mexican artist to be featured in the gallery that bought the piece. It was the very famous and prestigious Louvre. Her fashion also became an inspiration to everyone in France involved in her art or fashion. The benefit of being there was that other artists who lived or displayed their artsy work there accepted her with open arms. They were all very fond of the new upcoming artist with her unique style and flavor. People like Pablo Picasso and fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli took a great liking to her style. Frida even became the inspiration for one of her dresses. Seeking asylum for Soviet leader Leon Trotsky and his wife in Mexico, throughout all of her trips aboard for her art exhibition, Frida and Rivera were still married, and it was during this phase of her life that the two of them could agree in one thing, that was politics. Together, they petitioned Mexico to help Soviet leader Leon Trotsky and his wife find an asylum there. They initially found refuge in their home at Casa Azul, and later moved into their own place in Coyoacan. Even agreeing on politics and still being married, the affairs with other people continued, and Frida and Trotsky eventually ended up having an affair. Why are we not surprised? Trotsky gets assassinated in his home, leading to the arrest of Frida and her sister. They say that your past will follow you no matter where you go. This applies especially to those involved in politics. In 1940, assassins managed to break into the house of Trotsky and his wife and took his life. Even after many failed attempts to kill him, and failing the high walls and thick security, The assassins found their way to the once fierce leader. Frida and her sister Christina knew the assassin and therefore were arrested on counts of suspicion. They were later released without any charges to their names. This came 1 year after Rivera divorced Frida, and they finally called it quits. This, of course, didn't stop Frida from continuing life as normal when it came to her constant affairs. Taking the term keeping it in the family a little too far, one of the biggest betrayals she encountered with Rivera is when he had an affair with her sister. Frida eventually forgave him, as she always did, but this one was the straw that broke the camel's back, and it was never the same between her and Rivera, and with her sister ever again. It was the ultimate betrayal, and even though they had many ups and downs, it was the breaking point she didn't need, as she had so many levels of pain, both physically and emotionally, to deal with. There is no proof that the two ever communicated about the openness of their affairs or whether it was just continue being something they despised, but from the continued affair from both sides, we can only assume it was done and a blind eye was turned. She had a successful second marriage, but before getting too excited, we regret to inform you that after the divorce, Rivera and Frida in 1939, they remarried again, and that following year, following the death of Trotsky. After their first divorce, Frida started a very passionate affair with an art dealer in San Francisco, conveniently where Rivera would frequently visit. After they got back together and remarried, the two had much more relaxed marriage this time. One could say that they accepted each other's differences and learned to just let each other be. That said, neither one of them stopped having affairs with other people. Today we would call this an open relationship. It was completely bound in freedom and trust, and while we highly doubt there was much of that in their relationship the first time, the second marriage worked out great. She taught her students to find simple subject matters and appreciate Mexican traditions again. She spent many years as a teacher of art during the 1940s. She taught at La Esmeralda, Mexico's national school of painting, sculpture, and printmaking. Her classroom was known to be what they referred to as a non-hierarchical environment with informal atmosphere. She taught her students a lot about finding subject matters outside in the streets. Their subject could be anything really. They learned to appreciate Mexican culture and fall in love with the simplest things about it again. She spent a lot of time emphasizing the importance of traditional art and the simplicity of it. Frida only had one solo art exhibition in Mexico before she died. The incredibly talented Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo and Calderon had but one single art exhibition in Mexico in 1953, the year before her death. Frida died the following year in 1954 at only 47 years old. Her work was well beyond her years, and her career as a teacher and solo artist was much briefer than the world right now would have liked. This we could probably say about many of the great artists who walked the earth like Bob Marley and so many others. Their early death surely contributes to why their art is so precious and so extremely sought after today. The original pieces, of course, as there were not many made, paintings, recordings, or sculptures, or whatever it is that they became famous for. She proudly flaunted her mestiza ancestry like a boss. Frida's style and dress sense was certainly the epitome of Mexican fashion and identity. She walked and talked about it every day. She flaunted what she had proudly as she performed her way into the hearts of everyone she met. She lived as a proud Mexican artist with fire and all of the metaphorical, spicy Mexican flavors in her soul. She rocked colorful clothing, skirts, long and short jewelry pieces, and copious amounts of it. She flaunted her traditions, her indigenous mestiza ancestry like a boss. Her style became sought after, and she certainly made fashion designers spice up their own lives with some colors and Mexican styles. Her most famous piece, self-portrait with thorn necklace and a hummingbird. The picture consists of exactly what the name says. The famous piece by her was the one done by her self-portrait. What a genius! Her self-portrait has butterflies in her hair, her loving monkey by her side, a cat, thorns around her neck, and a hummingbird. The whole picture depicts the things Frida loved and appreciated, the things she was into and loved painting. They resemble her interests, her pain, her symbols, and her beliefs. With all the things she loved came the things she hated, and that was her pain, yet also a huge inspiration and motivation for her art. So it was a bittersweet love-hate display of rich shapes, pictures, and colors. The very prominent unibrow set her face apart from the lack of hair shown in society today. The death of her father in 1941 and the height of her illness. After Frida's father passed away during the height of her illness, she fell into a very deep and dark depression. She was immediately very close to him as a child, and during her years of growing up, even during adulthood, her father was her best friend and biggest support. Frida's father passed away in 1941 when Frida started deteriorating with illness. It is safe to say that her illness was excruciating, and losing her father made her lose her strength to keep fighting. She lost a spiritual and emotional war with his death. She had to wear 28 different medical corsets to help her spine over many years. They were made of plaster, leather, and sometimes even steel. She was also treated with syphilis and an infection on her hand. Her pain was more than just physical, though. In 1945, Frida received some exciting news saying that a special surgery to be done in New York could possibly save her crooked spine. She flew over and underwent the excruciating surgery, but luck was clearly not on her side as the surgery was unsuccessful, and she succumbed to still not being able to stand or sit for too long before the pain took over. It was later reported after Frida's death that she was born and later died in the exact same place, the same building. The Frida Kahlo Museum was rigged from Kahlo's old home, which still contains the urn with Frida's ashes. The Casa Azul was donated to Rivera, who turned it into a now famous monument. She was not a surrealist, she was real, and so was her work. She painted herself in her famous self-portraits 55 times. They made up a third of her overall art, and it was all due to her isolation during her times in the hospital or in her room having to rest and heal from her many years of being constantly sick. One of the things that irritated her the most, though, was the labels people gave her. For example, they would often refer to her as a surrealist, and she despised it as her work was clearly not beyond reality. In fact, Frida was Adam, and to inform those who called her work surreal, how real it actually was, it was extensions of what she went through, how she felt with her dash of colors, which is what she was, a fury Mexican. As soon as Frida reached the height of her health problems, Rivera had another affair, but this one sent Frida over the edge. It completely destroyed her, and we think it might have been a projection of the turmoil she was already feeling inside, as all the other affairs he had never made her want to take her own life. So Frida tried to commit suicide, but without prevail. It wasn't successful, and after that, the decline in her health was declining more rapidly. Frida knew it was the end. She passed away on July 13th, 1954, at the age of 47, in the home where she was born and grew up. There was a lot of speculation about whether she took her own life because of the pain she was constantly going through. She became a big name, and everyone mourned her death with compassion and awe. As always, my good being, be loving and caring to each other. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave comments. Have a wonderful day.